2 years before the Conquest, Westeros was 7 separate kingdoms that had been at war with each other for thousands of years. 2 years later, it was one. The man who did it landed with roughly 1,600 men against 7 kings, tens of thousands of soldiers, and the strongest castles ever raised in Westeros. And here is the part that gets lost in the retelling. He barely fought 2 battles. In the entire War of Conquest, Aegon Targaryen fought 2 real battles. Everything else, the North, the Vale, the Rock, Oldtown, was surrender. Because Aegon was not primarily a general. He was the first man in Westerosi history to understand that if you make an example, terrifying enough, you never have to make a second one. This is how the Targaryens took Westeros. The Targaryens were not Westerosi. They were refugees. They had been a minor Valyrian Dragonlord family, not the greatest, not close, who moved to a rock in the narrow sea 12 years before the Doom destroyed Valyria, because a daughter of the house dreamed it was coming. Everyone else laughed. Then the freehold burned, and the Targaryens were the only Dragonlords left alive in the world. And then they sat on Dragonstone for 100 years and did nothing. That is the detail people skip. For a century, the last Dragonlords in existence were a middling house on a volcanic island, marrying Valyrian, keeping to themselves, ignored by every king on the mainland. Then came Aegon and his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, whom he married both. 3 siblings, 3 dragons. Balerion the Black Dread, whose fire could melt stone. Vugger, ridden by Visenya, the elder sister, a warrior who wore mail and carried a Valyrian steel sword. And Meraxes, ridden by Rhaenys, the younger, who preferred singers to soldiers and flew simply for the joy of it. In Aegon's hall stood a great table carved in the shape of Westeros. Nobody knows when he decided, but he had the map before he had the war. Aegon landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush and threw up an earth and timber fort. It was a crude thing, and it would eventually become King's Landing. Then he sent letters to all 7 kings, informing them that there was now one king in Westeros, and inviting them to submit, understand who he was writing to. Harren the Black held the Riverlands and the Iron Islands. Argilac the Arrogant held the Stormlands. Mern the Ninth held the Reach. Lauren held the Rock. Torrhen Stark held the North. A boy held the Vale. And Dorne was Dorne. Most of them ignored him. Argilac Durrandon did not. Aegon had offered him an alliance sealed by marriage. Argilac's daughter to Aegon's commander, Orys Baratheon, a man widely rumoured to be Aegon's own bastard half-brother. Argilac returned the envoy's hands in a box with a note. "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me." But the real problem was Harren. Harren the Black had spent 40 years and the wealth of 2 kingdoms building Harrenhal, the largest castle ever raised in Westeros, with walls so thick and towers so high that no army in the world could take it. Generations of small folk died quarrying the stone. It was finished the same year Aegon landed. Aegon came to its gates and told Harren that if he did not yield, House Hoare would end that night. Harren looked at his walls and refused. Stone, he pointed out, does not burn. He was correct. Stone does not burn. Aegon flew Balerion high above the castle and came down on it out of the dark, and the fire went over the walls rather than through them. It turned Harrenhal's towers into chimneys, and the men inside them into ash. Harren and all his sons died in the tallest tower. House Hoare ended that night, exactly as promised. And the Riverlords, who had hated Harren for decades, immediately declared for Aegon. That is the pattern the whole conquest runs on. One demonstration, then compliance. The Stormlands fell first. Orys Baratheon met Argilac at a battle they named the Last Storm and killed him. Argilac's daughter Argella barred the gates of Storm's End and declared herself Storm Queen, and her own garrison betrayed her, delivering her to Orys in chains. Orys married her, took her house's sigil and words as his own, and founded House Baratheon. Then came the only moment in the war when Aegon faced a real army. Mern the Ninth of the Reach and Lauren of the Rock combined their strength. 55,000 men. The largest host ever assembled in Westeros to that point, and it outnumbered Aegon's forces roughly 5-1. For the only time in the entire conquest, all three dragons flew together. The field was dry. The fire spread faster than men could run in armor. 4,000 died in the flames. Another 1,000 fell to sword and spear and arrow. 10,000 more lived and carried the burns for the rest of their lives. King Mern died there. And so did every one of his sons, his grandsons, his brothers, his cousins, every branch of his kin. House Gardner, which had ruled the Reach since the Age of Heroes, was extinguished in a single afternoon. They called it the Field of Fire. Loren Lannister escaped the flames and did the arithmetic. He came back the next day and knelt. Aegon let him keep Casterly Rock and everything in it. The Lannisters lost a crown and kept a kingdom. And because House Gardner no longer existed, Aegon handed Highgarden and the Reach to the Gardener's own steward, a man named Tyrell. Torrhen Stark marched south with 30,000 Northmen and stopped at the Trident, where he could see 3 dragons on the far bank. He spent the night in council. His bastard brother argued for battle. Torrhen worked out what 30,000 men were worth against Dragonfire on open ground. He had heard what happened in the Reach. And in the morning, he crossed the river, knelt in the mud, and laid his crown at Aegon's feet. History calls him the King Who Knelt, and there is contempt in the name that he does not deserve. He is the only king in the story who correctly assessed the situation and saved his entire army by doing so. The Vale never fought at all. It was held by Shara Erin, ruling for her young son, and the Eyrie was genuinely impregnable. You cannot besiege a castle on top of a mountain. So Visenya simply flew Vhagar over the walls and landed in the courtyard. The boy king Ronel Arryn, who was perhaps 6 years old, looked at the largest creature he had ever seen and asked whether he could have a ride. His mother surrendered the Vale. Visenya took the boy up over the mountains and gave him his flight. Oldtown, the richest city in Westeros, opened its gates without a fight. And the High Septon of the Faith placed the crown on Aegon's head himself, which mattered more than any battle. The Faith had just told 7 kingdoms that this conquest was legitimate, and Aegon gathered the swords of every enemy who had surrendered to him, and had Balerion melt and fold them into a chair deliberately built to be uncomfortable. A king should never sit easy, he said. 6 kingdoms, not 7. Dorne was ruled by Meria Martell, 80 years old, blind, enormous, and known to her enemies as the Yellow Toad. When Rhaenys flew to Sunspear to demand her surrender, Meria gave her an answer that Dorne has been quoting ever since. "You may burn us, my lady, but you will not bend us, break us, or make us bow. This is Dorne. You are not wanted here. Return at your peril." And then the Dornish did the one thing that beats a dragon. They refused to be a target. They abandoned their castles rather than defend them, They put no army in the field. They struck the Targaryen supply lines and vanished into the desert. Aegon burned Dornish castles and found nobody inside them. You cannot terrify a population that has already gone. In 10 AC, at a castle called the Hellholt, a scorpion bolt fired from the tallest tower struck Meraxes through the eye. The dragon came down on the tower and destroyed it. Rhaenys Targaryen died in the fall. Her body was never recovered. Aegon burned Dorne for years afterward, and Dorne did not bend. The war eventually just stopped, with no treaty and no surrender. Dorne finally joined the realm 187 years later, through a marriage, not a dragon. Which is the thing worth taking away from all of it. 3 dragons conquered a continent in 2 years, and every hard lesson that followed, the dance, the extinction of the dragons, and eventually a queen in Essos who thought fire alone would be enough, comes from the same misunderstanding. Dragons are extraordinarily good at taking a kingdom. They have never once been any use at holding one. Aegon's dynasty tore itself apart 4 times over who should sit that throne. The bloodiest of those wars is the next video in this series. Subscribe and you'll get it when it lands.